about just his life, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, Bill Gates isn't the guy I should be doing it. But this is my family, and I love this picture. It's one of my favorite pictures because it really encapsulates our family as a whole. Because this is my niece and my nephew, my little sister, my mom, me, my brother, my dad, and my older sister. And it's kind of funny because my little sister is younger than my niece and my nephew. So it's very interesting family that I have, but it's a family nonetheless, and I love them very much. And so my dad and I are almost one and the same. I talk the way he does. I have the same passions as he does, and we even share a lot of the same hobbies. And when I'm feeling down, he's there to pick me up, but when I'm feeling really good, he's there to enjoy the good times with me. I can't think of a time where I didn't think I could ask my dad for help. And I feel like no matter what I do, no matter how stupid, no matter how deep down I get into the problem that I'm in, I know that I can always call him, and he's only 15 minutes away. He's going to be right there. For our early life, we have a very similar past life, if I should say it that way. His parents got separated when he was only 6 years old. They were both alcoholics, very toxic relationship that didn't really work out too well, and he had to leave his very young brother with a very abusive mother. And he told me stories about times whenever he would have his mom there, because he stayed with his mom, and his mom would go out to bars and he'd have to watch his baby brother, and he was only 6 years old. And one time he had fallen asleep because he was so young, and it was so late in the night, and his brother had woken up and was crying. And so the upstairs neighbor had came down to their apartment and took the younger brother and went back upstairs. And when the mom came home, little brother wasn't there, but my dad was. And so she took the telephone cord and did what a lot of mothers, abusive mothers do. And so whenever my mom and my dad were separated and I'd have to leave my dad, it was kind of comforting to know that I wasn't alone in this, because my dad had went through not the same thing, but the same thing worse. I knew that I didn't have it nearly as bad as he did, or that a lot of people did, and that was comforting to know that just because they weren't together didn't mean that my parents didn't love each other anymore. It didn't mean that they didn't love us anymore. It just meant that it didn't work out, and it could be a lot worse. With new families come a lot of new problems, and so my mom had gotten new boyfriends, and new boyfriends do what new boyfriends do and try to be a little bit of a father role, and that often led to shouting matches between me and those men. And it never got physical, but there were some times whenever it felt like it might have. And so whenever I was feeling angry, scared, and alone, I always had my dad to call, and he would tell me stories about whenever he wasn't, whenever his mom and his dad were separated, and his mom's boyfriends and him would get into altercations. And he even told me one time about a time when his mom's boyfriend was beating her, and at only 13 years old, he had to fight this grown man to keep him off of his own mother. When I started to get a little bit older, I started to realize that I wasn't necessarily as much of like little kids as that were my age. And I realized that I had some things wrong with me. And so my dad was diagnosed with bipolar at 27. And the National Institute of Mental Health says that the average onset of bipolar is 25. So it kind of works out. They did not say that I have bipolar. They did take me to see if I had it, and they said, you know, he's really young. More than likely he doesn't have bipolar, but he does have tendencies that kind of correlate with it. And so more than likely I might have it. They just don't see it as a problem yet. But I was diagnosed with anxiety at 8 years old. And according to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, about 3.1% of the America's population suffers from generalized anxiety disorder. I didn't really have a whole lot of people to talk to whenever I was younger because I was always very nervous. I'm still a very nervous person, but it was very nice to have my dad who was there, and I knew that he wasn't necessarily, like everybody else either. And so I wasn't alone again, because I was alone, but I was alone together with my dad. There were problems because my dad was also an alcoholic. He learned from his parents this is the way that you deal with things. Whenever you have a bad day at work, you come home and you drink. If you have a fight with your wife, you drink. And alcohol has very bad tendencies whenever you also have depression. Alcohol oftentimes makes the feelings that you have much more intensified, and about 3 or 4 years ago he tried to commit suicide. This was the first time whenever I looked at my dad not as a person on a pedestal, but as another person just like I am. And I realized that just because I have problems and he tells me he has problems too, doesn't mean that that just makes my problems better. It means that we both have problems, and we both need to work on them. He got out of the mental hospital he was in after trying to commit suicide, and it turned out that it was a blessing in disguise. After he left, he had gotten help inside with his alcoholism, and even to this day, he might have a beer or two on the weekends or something like that, but it's nowhere near the large amounts of alcohol that he used to drink. He is addicted to cigarettes still, and growing up I used to see my mom and my dad both smoking cigarettes. And so I learned that that was a way to deal with stress. And recently I've quit. I've been good for 3 or 4 months now, and I'm actively trying to help my dad to get to the same point that I am. On a much brighter note, my father and I also share a lot of the same hobbies. We both like to listen to rock and roll, and I even went to my very first concert with them. We also used to play a lot of games, and we still do to this day. I remember whenever I was very young, back when my mom and dad were still together, we'd stay up until 2 in the morning playing on these old laptops, playing StarCraft or Red Alert 2, and just having the most amount of fun until I was just so tired that I couldn't even stay up anymore. We both have a lot of the same goals, but his career is much more diverse than mine is, of course. One of the things that I love about my dad is that he can build a house from the ground up. He's had a lot of different jobs, and he's been a master plumber, master electrician. If there's something wrong with the house, he knows how to fix it. And he loves to cook. He's had several jobs cooking. He started when he was my age cooking at a place called Steak and Nail, and he would have steaks lined up on the grill until he couldn't put any more on. Then he went on to a scallop boat, and he would go out on these fishing trips, and he would cook for the scallop boat fishermen. My dad has a very interesting saying. I'm sure he's not the one that came up with it, but it's always stuck with me. He says, "I'm a jack of all trades, but a master of none." Because it kind of made me think, I can try anything that I want to. I may never be the best at anything I do, but at least I'll be able to make a mark in any field I go into. My dad and I have this kind of goal that we've put into place. He knows how to fix houses, and I like to look at houses. And so the way I saw it is if I can buy the houses, you can fix them, and then we can both sell them together. And so now we are planning on having our own real estate company whenever I get out of college. My dad has shown me that no matter what I can do, I can be successful in it. And if it wasn't for him, I likely wouldn't be a quarter of the man that I am today. My dad has told me from a very young age that I can't always worry about everything that's unknown, and that sometimes I really just have to have faith in my own judgment. I know that no matter where I go in life, my dad will be there to support me and help me in any way he can. I'd like to leave you all with a message from my dad. I felt like if I was going to share his story, he might as well be able to have his own voice in there too. He wanted to say that no matter what you're going through now, you can always come back from it. And that death is always a permanent solution for a temporary problem.